My name is Seth Shipman. I'm a postdoctoral fellow here in the Church Lab, and I am working on encoding information into DNA inside of living cells. And so we're trying to make living cells that can actually go out into the world and gather information and store it. One of the things that I worked on for a while here is encoding information in DNA. And so the idea was to have cells go in and gather biological information. Before we could fully do that, to gather biological information, we were trying to work on a prototype to just store any information to show that the actual system would work. And I think that in conversation with Joe, he pushed me to not just encode random strings of bases, DNA bases and nucleotides that really don't mean anything, but to encode information that is meaningful. And so we ended up encoding images and movies. And I think that was much more powerful and was able to push the science so that it's interesting still to scientists, but they would have been interested if it was just nucleotides, but it became much more interesting to a wider group of people. My experience with the kind of boundaries of art and science really has been through my interactions with Joe Davis, who's here in the lab, who works really closely with us almost every day. It's been, for me, really an amazing experience, just because I think that, it brings an infusion of creativity to this work that is sometimes very nuanced and detailed. And so I think that with Joe around kind of pushing us to think about larger themes, it really makes the science grow into what might be a bigger, kind of more expansive ideas. And I think that's good from a general sense. It also sometimes is really good, on a very small, detailed sense, where you just kind of are stuck on some project and this kind of infusion of something very, very different, which, having an artist in the lab, especially an artist like Joe Davis, is able to just kind of like pop you out of your bubble and make you think about different things. And so I think that, as a scientist, it's incredibly advantageous to have that around. It's also, interesting because it opens up new possibilities for interaction between us. Joe and I actually have started projects together. We've given joint talks together. I've taken some of my science and presented it as art in gallery space because of Joe. And so, it opens up all these different possibilities. And then, I try to give something back where I can and try to teach Joe about some of the stuff that I'm working on. We often, I think, learn from each other. The neurons usually will connect to other neurons. So like these cells are interconnected, and that's kind of what they do. If you culture these cells in complete isolation, which I was trying to do, so a single cell on a single isolated island, that cell will actually connect to itself and form this very, very small microcircuit. So it's not a circuit that normally would form in nature, but when you do these cultured systems, you can get this like internally looped system to form. And I was talking a lot to Joe about this, and he, I think, again, encouraged me to really think about how that is a bit of a, not just an interesting biological phenomenon, but somewhat of a poetic phenomenon, which is that this cell, which is the cell that allows us to be cognitive beings, is actually only internally referenced. It's connected to itself. Joe Davis has quite a background in science. He's gathered it over the last several decades, and so we can kind of converse in a shared language already. But I don't think that is necessary. I think that having artists who have less of a background would still definitely be fruitful. It would still increase creativity, force you to look at problems from a different light. It's encouraging creativity. So artists, by their nature and by the way that they approach the world, it's this constant encouraging of creative thought. And there's no reason why that should be limited to artists. I think that scientists absolutely benefit from it, but it's maybe helpful to have someone there to actually say, it's okay, go ahead and think outside the box, go ahead and approach this from a very different way, at least for a moment, and don't worry about the small details. You can come back to that. And so I think that it's almost just an allowance to let yourself go into that direction.